Hey there everyone, this is Eternal Snowman, and I'm here with a little bit of a different video. Because the Uber's Open is about to start in a couple days, I wanted to make a video about my thoughts on the Uber's tier. Well, there's going to be a couple of videos released soon, within the next few days, about, first I'm going to be making a tier list on what I think are the essentially the viability rankings of all the Pokemon inside the Uber's metagame, and also I wanted to essentially make a team building guide slash essentially a checklist of how to build a team and what makes teams successful. And to start it off, we're going to be going through what I believe are all the S and A tier mons inside the Uber's metagame. I know this format looks a little bit scruffy because this is just a Word document, but I hope that you guys enjoy this video, and I hope you can gain something out of it as well. So, starting with the S plus tier, I believe there are 3 Pokemon that qualify for the S tier, and that's because of what I believe are the most important things about a Pokemon in Uber's metagame is, 1, their unpredictability. If they're unpredictable, or you need some form of scouting to be able to deal with the Mon, I think that's very dangerous to have in a Pokemon. And having multiple viable sets is very much part of it, as well as niche options that can potentially be very dangerous. And while also being able to provide consistency, Pokemon that are good in most matchups and not just like niche. For example, you could be extremely potentially threatening with a Pokemon like Thundurus Therian, but because of the fact that it's relatively linear and the fact that it can only run one real set, or like a couple of sets, but like it doesn't have the consistency in matchup either. So against certain matchups, it's going to struggle significantly. So the 3 Pokemon I have in the S plus and S tier, like combined S tier, are I'll start with S plus tier. I think the only Pokemon that qualifies for this is, of course, the King of Ubers, Xerneas. I think Xerneas is by far the best Pokemon in Ubers right now. While my opinion might change later, I used to think that Xerneas was probably only the second best mon to Yveltal, but because of metagame trends and how I feel like the metagame has evolved around Xerneas recently, I think Xerneas has become the best Pokemon in Ubers. And I think it's not even close right now, the gap between the S plus tier and the S tier. I think Xerneas is by far and away the best Pokemon in Ubers because it has 4 viable, consistent sets, which is ridiculous because no other Pokemon can boast this, while it also has niche sets that can deal with a lot of its so-called checks and counters that would be its like consistent sets. Its 4 consistent sets are Choice Specs, Choice Scarf, Geomancy, and Z Geomancy. All 4 of the sets are good in their own scenario, although Z Geomancy with the introduction of Marshadow has gotten nerfed a bit. It is still very threatening because Marshadow still can't switch into Xerneas. And unless you're running Sash, which is inconsistent because if you have Rocks up, then you can't switch in anymore. You need a hard switch into Xerneas. So if the Xerneas player makes one good play, then you're done. So Xerneas takes this spot because of its omnipresence in the metagame. Its Moonblast does so much damage, even unboosted, and it forces teams to run multiple checks and counters to its different sets. And even common checks and counters are bypassed by some of its like its Choice Spec set and its like other sets. There are only 2 Pokemon that can consistently deal with Xerneas, which are Magearna and Aegislash. And both of these are pretty soft checks to the Choice Spec set because they can get weakened down easily, and they both are very bad in other matchups that are not in a Xerneas matchup, because they both don't provide much outside of being like a toxic immunity. For Magearna, it beats Yveltal like slightly, but it still is threatened by like Firium Z sets and Choice Specs Heat Wave, and it doesn't even switch in safely against, like, if it gets knocked off from a like Black Glasses or a Choice Band or a Choice Scarf set, then it can be severely crippled. So like, my point is that Xerneas, people are forced to run suboptimal Pokemon to deal with it. And there's, outside of those two Pokemon, Aegislash and Aegislash and Magearna, there are no Pokemon that can beat all of Xerneas' sets. For example, Primal Groudon, which has generally been known to be a very strong Xerneas check, it loses to its Choice Spec set. Offensive variants just get straight up to it KO'd, while defensive sets don't fare any better since they can only take 2 or 3 hits, and if they switch into a round of rocks, then they just die. Like 2 or 3 hits, and then it will be KO'd after. And then they also lose to ZGO because of Ingrain, so Pidon doesn't really deal with it that well. It deals with its standard Geo set very well, except it can still get weakened, and then it can't really do that much back. So, and then you're still forced to run Pokemon that can check its other sets, like Ho-Oh, Celesteela, and these Pokemon are very good in the metagame, undoubtedly. But at the same time, you have to be forced to run multiple sets, and Xerneas can bluff one of the sets to be able to, like, force you into like bad situations. For example, if you can bluff using Pixie Plate, you can bluff people into thinking you're a Choice Spec set and then bop them with a Close Combat. Or you can bluff Choice Scarf with an Expert Belt set and do a Rock Slide on a Ho-Oh or like similar. As such, Xerneas has evolved to be probably the best Pokemon in the metagame. And outside of its 4 notable sets, I'll name some more niche sets that could see potential in the future, and also they're decent now, but not like spectacular. First, Calm Mind and plus Z move. Calm Mind plus Z move, while generally considered inferior to the Z Geo set, recently I think it could obtain more recognition because of the advent of Marshadow. Marshadow forces ZGO to be suboptimal because it requires you to be use a turn to set up, and Marshadow is has had a huge impact on the metagame. And so Calm Mind can allow you to set up on Pokemon, run defensive EVs, and also its Z move can be used to go essentially muscle through its supposed checks like Ho-Oh if you're running Electrium Z, or Celesteela, or Phytinium Z can also go through Pidon and other checks like that. And also Calm Mind has the added benefit of over Geomancy, that Calm Mind can also be set up at multiple times, so setting up a Calm Mind doesn't restrict you into being forced into a sweep like a Geomancy does, because you can't really set up Geomancy twice. Another niche set is the Life Orb / Pixie Plate / Expert Belt set, that essentially you bluff another item and then you hit your supposed switch-ins with coverage moves, because Xerneas has amazing coverage moves, namely Rock Slide, Close Combat. But it also, these sets are very good at threatening Stall because of the Aromatherapy access. It has a strong Moonblast still, which threatens a lot of the Pokemon in Stall, mainly Mega Sableye. Thunder to hit Celesteela, Toxapex, and these Pokemon. Close Combat can hit Ferrothorn, and the Ferrothorn not as hard as Focus Blast, but still it hits Ferrothorn, and also it hits Blissey and Chansey, which is mainly the most important part. And Rock Slide can threaten Ho-Oh. So overall, I think Xerneas deserves the #1 spot in Ubers right now. And for moving on to the S tier, there are 2 Pokemon that I want to mention. And I'll start with probably the more unpopular opinion, Yveltal. I think Yveltal is a very underappreciated Pokemon, in my opinion, because I think it's at the top of the metagame, and it has been since the beginning of Sun and Moon, in my opinion. And the current metagame trends have even helped Yveltal, not as much as Xerneas, but it has helped Yveltal. Outside of Xerneas being fantastic, Yveltal also beats the other S tier mon, which I'm pretty sure you guys can guess by now is Primal Groudon. Yveltal, it has a variety of good sets, and I think it's consistently good sets, actually eclipse Xerneas's. So Choice Scarf is probably the best set right now around. It's one of the best. It is, in my opinion, the best Choice Scarf for right now. And Xerneas is the second best. But Yveltal has amazing matchups against almost every single matchup, barring Stall as a Choice Scarfer, which Xerneas doesn't boast, because Xerneas is very good at HO matchups, but Yveltal has a similar matchup versus HO, but better matchups versus balanced, bulky offense. And it's very good because it has access to a very strong priority move, access to foul play, very strong foul play because of Dark Aura, has access to good coverage moves such as Heat Wave and Focus Blast to hit its respective quote-unquote counters, such as Magearna and Tyranitar, although Tyranitar has gotten a big nerf in Viability recently. And that's one of the reasons why Yveltal has risen in Viability, in my opinion, as well, because metagame trends have been against Tyranitar, because Tyranitar, as a Ghost Trapper, isn't as effective since one of the premier ghosts, Marshadow, cannot be trapped by Tyranitar due to the fact that it's 4 times weak to fighting. And Tyranitar, while very good as a Pokemon, it checks other stuff, but without its main niche, which is beating ghost types, it falls down in Viability. So Yveltal takes a higher spot because its primary check, one of its primary checks, no longer is viable. Also, access to pivot moves such as U-Turn put it over Xerneas, in my opinion, as a Choice Scarfer. And it also has fantastic other sets. Its Life Orb set is very hard to wall. And with its 4th move, okay, so assuming you're running Dark Pulse and Oblivion Wing, its other 2 moves can be used to put holes into your opponent. Heat Wave is a good option since it hits Pokemon such as Ferrothorn and Magearna, while Taunt can stall break. U-Turn can give you a way to pivot out of bad situations. You can also run Sucker Punch for the priority, and Foul Play to threaten setup sweepers such as Mega Mons. So overall, I think Yveltal has probably been a very consistently good Pokemon throughout the metagame. And outside of its big Choice Scarf set, which I think is probably its best set right now, it also has the Life Orb set, which I mentioned, its Choice Spec set, Choice Band set, which are both very good wall breakers, although not the best wall breakers around, but they're very good. It also has its defensive set, which is very, very strong. And these are the 5, what I would call, no. There's 2 more other sets, but those 5 sets are what you would expect out of an Yveltal. The other 2 sets are its 2 Z-move sets. One, I think, is the physical Z-move set and the special Z-move set. The special Z-move set can run 2 Z-moves, which is Fire EMZ to hit Magearna, and its would-be switch-ins to Steel switch-ins, while its Fly-In EM set hits mainly Xerneas and other fairies that want to switch into its to resist its Dark type. While its physical set should be running normally either Steel EMZ, which is kind of a niche option to hit some of its resists, mainly Arceus Rock and Clefable, or Dark-In EMZ. Knockoff Dark-In EMZ is very strong and can bypass a lot of its strong checks. So all in all, I think Yveltal, very versatile mon, extremely good at what it does. Scarf Foul Play is very dangerous. Very strong Dark Pulse, very strong Sucker Punch, and its stab is very hard to resist. And Dark Resists are actually less common in Ubers now than they were before, with more people moving towards the Ghost Resists more so. And Yveltal checks and counters have been less and less common, especially since Yveltal's checks and counters are actually not very good, are not the same as Marshadow's checks and counters. And Marshadow has made a very good partner for Yveltal in that sense. So, moving on to the last one in the S tier, Primal Groudon. Can't spell. Primal Groudon, no surprise. Primal Groudon is probably outside of Arceus, which I'm ranking on each Arceus form on its own, because obviously ranking them together would literally just be broken, because they're So good together. It is the most versatile mon in Ubers in terms of roles. I don't think, however, it's very much more versatile in sets than Yveltal or Xerneas because, okay, so its primary sets are Stealth Rocks, which is the one that you're going to be seeing the most. Defensive Stealth Rocks, Spadef Dawn, as I would like to call it. And the other ones are Double Dance, Jolly SD, and then Mixed RP. Those are the 4 viable sets. And Jolly Dawn got a significant nerf with the introduction of Marshadow. While it's a threatening sweeper, its checks and counters are relatively easily built in with Pokemon such as very splashable Pokemon such as Giratina O, Rayquaza for the special set, Rayquaza for the defensive set, and Jolly SD sets, Zygarde for most sets, and Arceus Water, Arceus Ground. These very common checks and counters to threaten Primal Groudon means that it can't be the offensive threat that it really wants. However, it does succeed more defensively than Xerneas, and it provides similar roles to Yveltal, but I think Yveltal is overall better because of its offensive. It's more of an offensive threat. Its defensive set is also a lot more of a threat than Primal Groudon. Primal Groudon is more of a catch-all defensive backbone Pokemon, which can be useful, but Yveltal also does provide a ground immunity. And Primal Groudon, outside of Stealth Rocks, doesn't provide as much. I think they're on about the same tier in terms of viability. Primal Groudon is obviously going to be used more because of its roll compression compared to the other 2 Pokemon. Xerneas and Yveltal is used a little bit less because it can't be fit on every playstyle like Primal Groudon can, and it doesn't receive the same. I think it's just underrated, but I think Primal Groudon definitely deserves its place in the S tier. It can run things to bypass its checks and counters, like Rest for the Arceus Waters around. It can run HP Ice for Zygarde and Mence and Ray. It can run like Dragon Pulse for Giratina Origin, etc., etc. It doesn't really have the same power as the other 2 Pokemon, though. It is, however, the best of the 3 in defensively. Alright. Let's move on to the A tiers, and we'll start with Mega Gengar. Because even with the introduction of Marshadow, I think Mega Gengar really is. Wow, you guys can't see this, can you? Shit. Well, whatever. Mega Gengar really is one of the best Pokemon in the tier. Because its Shadow Tag ability is so threatening in the sense that it can limit and essentially remove all Pokemon from a certain team that it threatens. It makes it very good against multiple playstyles and can be useful in every single matchup. While some of the with Marshadow being increasingly popular, and some of the Pokemon that check Marshadow also being better, for example, Choice Scarf Yveltal, Gengar did get a little bit of a nerf in viability, but I still believe it to be a very strong Pokemon and the best Mega inside Ubers right now. It can be run on every playstyle because of its Shadow Tag. However, it's also not very versatile. You know exactly what's going to happen whenever a Mega Gengar is on the field and what it's going to be doing. And while it has 2 different sets, they essentially accomplish the same thing. They want to remove the Pokemon that it needs to. And there are ways to play around Mega Gengar too. Mainly because Ghosts cannot be trapped. It has a lot of checks and counters that are pretty common in the tier as well. The reason why Mega Gengar is so good is not because it's an offensive threat. It's a threat in the sense that it can remove the Pokemon that are dangerous to it, to its teammates, and then the teammates can sweep. It really requires a good player to use it that well, though. I think Mega Gengar is a Pokemon that the better you are as a player, the more useful it can be. And that's because Shadow Tag prevents your opponent from making the same plays, making counterplay to your good plays. So if you're better than your opponent, then Mega Gengar will be useful to you. Alright, and moving on, in the A+ tier, okay, going through this list, I think Arceus Ground has earned itself the spot as the best support CS Pokemon in Ubers because of it has two very good sets, one which got nerfed in Viability, the other still the best support CS form in my opinion. Ground CS has reigned supreme in my opinion in SM, mainly due to metagame trends and the Pokemon that have been used or have. There's no reason not to run Ground CS over. There had been no reason to run Ground CS. Other support CS forms over Ground CS until recently, where Fairy CS has shown more of a niche. But I think Ground CS is still significantly better. It's the best defog Arceus form by far because of its ability to threaten a lot of the common SR setters and maintain near perfect coverage with its ground ice coverage. Outside of like Ho-Oh and stuff, most of the metagame is threatened by Arceus Ground. The Ground Stab is extremely good in the Uber's metagame. As such, you are required to bring multiple ground resists, if not at least one immunity and as many resists as possible, because of the omnipresence of how good a lot of the ground types are in this tier. As such, Arceus Ground it also provides a good check to Primal Groudon, most sets of Primal Groudon, and can switch in with relative ease. While its sweeping sets aren't as good anymore because of Marshadow, I think Arceus Ground is still fantastic because of its support CS. Alright, moving on from Arceus Ground. Also, the reason why it's so good is because it's the Premier Stall variant of Arceus because of what it checks. It's also very good on balance because of defog, and defog is very good on these balance and bulky offense styles. And then moving on, Primal Kyogre, another Pokemon. It's a personal favorite of mine, so I might be a little bit biased on this. Primal Kyogre is one of the, in my opinion, a very skillful Pokemon. If you are good with it, it can be the best Pokemon. And if you are bad with it, it can be pretty much useless in a lot of matchups. And the set I'm talking about is, of course, the Scald Toxic Rest Talk set that I have used in so many of my matches. And I really believe it's one of the best Pokemon in the metagame because it rewards you for playing well. And that's because every single one of its switch-ins gets punished in some way by switching in, except for like Ferrothorn. But Ferrothorn will still get burned. And Primal Kyogre, what makes it so special over some of its other defensive Pokemon is that it has options to threaten it because it can fit Toxic and Rest Talk. It really doesn't have the same weaknesses as a Pokemon like Ho-Oh does. While Ho-Oh may have better resistances than Primal Kyogre, because Primal Kyogre doesn't really have that many resistances. It has like fire immunity. It has like what? Ice resist, like water resist, except not really because it has the Primordial Sea. So like what Primal Kyogre is super good at is it's good at breaking down passive mons like Celesteela, like support CS. All support CS forms fall to it. It's also a great status absorber, and it also is very good in the HO matchup because it's very naturally bulky, so it can take hits and retaliate very hard because it has 180 base special attack with Primordial Sea. Its common switch-ins, such as Primal Groudon, get punished really hard by Toxic. So the only Pokemon that can reliably switch in is Ferrothorn. And Ferrothorn is still not super good just because it can get burned, and then it's crippled. As such, Primal Kyogre really is a very good Pokemon. It has Rest Talk is relatively good on it, and makes it act as a good status absorber. It's extremely bulky with a defensive investment. It can also run sets to bypass its checks and counters, such as Ice Beam as a niche option on the Rest Talk set, but namely you can run Sub-Calm Mind to bypass Ferrothorn and other standard Primal Kyogre switch-ins, like Spadefdon is not a super good switch-in anymore. Okay. And moving forward, I think that pretty much concludes the A+ tier. The A+ tier is really the premier Pokemon in the metagame that aren't metagame defining and team building. They're very good, but they also, and most of what makes them good is either they're splashable, they can check and counter specific Pokemon very well, or they're just overall very good. Alright, and that starts us off with the A tier. One of the Pokemon that has defined current meta trends as of late is Marshadow. And people might disagree with me for putting it in the A tier as opposed to higher up. I think Marshadow has quite a few weaknesses, along with its vast amount of strengths. I think Marshadow is very good because its unresisted stab coverage, ghost fighting. It's very hard to find anything to switch into it reliably. Even Pokemon that are very bulky can still be threatened because its stab coverage is so good against the defensive Pokemon of Ubers, which has resulted Stall to being using Pokemon such as Toxapex and to be able to beat it. Its Z move bulk up set is also good at threatening the Pokemon that would be checks and counters to these, while also Life Orb sets can run things like Rock Tomb to beat Ho-Oh and defensive Eviltal, and Choice Scarf Eviltal as well, while HP Ice can beat things like Mega Ments and Zygarde Complete. Marshadow is very threatening, however, people have overstated, in my opinion, how good Marshadow is, because while it's extremely hard to switch into, the way you team build nowadays means that you just don't let it switch in for free. It loses 1v1s against a very significant portion of the metagame, actually, and that's very telling, because outside of what used to be the DOS HO builds, it doesn't have an amazing matchup spread. It's very threatening against Stall and HO, but it would struggle against what would be the common BO spreads of before. And while it punches holes, it normally will trade its life just to weaken another Pokemon. Also, common checks and counters have developed, such as defensive Fairy CS, which I'm actually going to be putting next on my list. And things like Choice Scarf Eviltal and Choice Scarf Xerneas have become more popular and better in the metagame, which is why Eviltal and Xerneas are, once again, at the top of the metagame. And Marshadow really struggles in the fact that it loses to a lot of things above it. It can't beat Primal Kyogre 1v1. It can't beat Arceus Ground. It can beat Arceus Ground, but it'll have to take a lot of damage. And things like Primal Groudon, it doesn't really beat super reliably because it can get burned by Lava Plume, or it'll eat like a Precipice Blades, or if it's Fire Blast or Overheat, then it'll just die. While Eviltal has Oblivion Wing, obviously, and then it can also hit it with the Scarf Foul Play, and Xerneas obviously just hits it with a Moonblast, and if it's Choice Scarf, then you're just dead. While I have no doubt Marshadow is a very good Pokemon, it really, I think, is overstated right now because of the new toy syndrome. And as the metagame settles, I think it'll end up around the A tier. And right now, I think that's where a lot of builders are figuring out how to beat it in team building. The main problem Marshadow causes for the tier is not Marshadow in itself. I think it has pretty much exacerbated the situation with what SM Ubers has really been recently. And SM Ubers has been, it's very hard to stand matchups because in matchups, it's impossible to win certain matchups in SM Ubers right now because of the way that team building has worked out. And this makes matchup and who you play against and what your opponent is very difficult. For example, my most favorite or my favorite playstyle, bulky offense, struggles against Stalt because it's near impossible to beat it with how many bulky mons they have, and then their access to Heal Bell normally, and then you kind of just lose a lot of progress when they click Heal Bell. And so every playstyle now has pretty much a way to get beaten, and matchup has become more important, and it's not more about player. And if you bring a bad enough, like if your team matchup is bad enough, you're gonna lose regardless of how good you are as a player, as long as they play to like a certain level and they don't get like hacks to shit. For example, Marshadow now struggles against the once very good matchup spread of DOSHO and Lancestall, with both of which were teams that had, in my opinion, they were the only two teams in SM Ubers that really had a clean matchup spread in the fact that if you played well enough, you could win those games. But now that's not the case anymore. But there are a couple more Pokemon I want to put on the A tier list. So let's start with the next one, Arceus Fairy. Not much needs to go into this explaining this. However, I do want to state here that when I'm putting Arceus Fairy here, I'm putting the Stealth Rocks Arceus Fairy set. I've been seeing a lot of Defog Arceus Fairy as a roll compression for Marshadow and Defog. I think Defog Arceus Fairy is garbage. It's fucking shit. Why? Because it loses to very many common SR setters and Spike setters. Because without Fire Blast, which most sets aren't running, they're running Defog, Recovered, Toxic, Judgment. It loses to Ferrothorn, it loses to Excadrill, it loses to DOS to an extent, it loses to Primal Groudon to an extent, and it loses to opposing Arceus forms, as in they get rocks for free, and you're punishing them with what? A Judgment, a Toxic, and they can get more off it. So it can't really beat the most common like setters. If you run Fire Blast, you still lose. Lose harder to Primal Groudon while maintaining a decent matchup versus Ferrothorn and Excadrill. And then like it's still the problem where Ho-Oh, for example, is extremely threatening to you. And why is it an amazing SR setter? Because it beats all of the common defog Pokemon or hazard removal Pokemon / control Pokemon. For example, Mega Sableye, Giratina Origin, opposing support CS if you're running Toxic, and other Pokemon like this. It's also been a very good Pokemon recently because of the because it checks Marshadow well. Okay, moving on. Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh, it has been a very polarizing Pokemon because it essentially is a Pokemon that I used to think it was very bad at the beginning of SM Ubers. And to an extent, I wasn't wrong. Because Ho-Oh, if your team has to be built a certain way to run Ho-Oh. While it's very binary Pokemon in the sense that you're either going to straight lose to it at a certain point, or you're going to win at a certain point with it. I mean, you're going to either straight lose to it, or it's just going to be useless at a certain point. Because Ho-Oh will outlast everything except for its checks. And count. Okay, it'll outlast everything up until a certain point. So, like, what I'm saying is, once it's defog, it'll always outlast its teammates, pretty much. It's defog. Once its defog partners are gone, once it gets statused, or once the only Pokemon left on their team are like Rock Move or Water Move users, that's when Ho-Oh loses. And while Ho-Oh is very good at beating Pokemon above it, such as Arceus Ground, such as Mega Gengar, such as Arceus Fairy, lacking Toxic or Stone Edge, such as Marshadow, non-Zemu Marshadow, such as most variants of Evoltal, such as mixed RP Primal Groudon, such as Choice Lock Xerneas. What Ho-Oh struggles with is the fact that Stealth Rocks is omnipresent in this tier. And Stealth Rocks is so good in this tier that every single team needs it. While this is pretty much true of almost every tier, what I'm saying is, if your Defogger gets weakened and you're putting so much pressure on your Defogger, because they're essentially Ho-Oh's second life, then Ho-Oh at a certain point is going to be a liability to your team. And it's very good in the sense that it has a fantastic defensive typing. It beats almost every Pokemon in the tier 1v1, barring certain exceptions. And its checks and counters its checks can be punished very hard. So, my point is that Ho-Oh is very good in the sense that you can win a lot of matches with it, but you can also lose a lot of matches with it. And so, what I want to say is that it's only deserving of A tier, and it can't go higher because of its limitation of rocks. Alright, I want to move on because I think this video is dragging on quite a bit longer than I would like. And the next Pokemon on this list is Zygarde Complete. And this is a Pokemon that most people would probably disagree with my placement here again, but hear me out. I think Zygarde Complete got a relatively big nerf in Viability with Marshadow coming out because it's passive, doesn't do that much, it loses to a lot of the Pokemon above it, and its biggest weakness, in my opinion, is the fact that it has a 4 times weakness to Ice. Well, okay, yeah, of course it does. But my point is that Ice coverage in Ubers is so important nowadays because so many top Pokemon want this Ice coverage. Arceus Ground, almost all support CS forms run Ice Beam now. As well as options like HP Ice on Marshadow, HP Ice on Ho-Oh, Arceus Fairy and Xerneas, obviously. It loses to most variants of Evoltal unless it glares and then just pairs it to shit. And if it's running Taunt, then Evoltal just wins. Primal Groudon they can run HP Ice as well. And so on and so forth. So Zygarde is very good. It's super bulky. It's super good in that sense. Not super good in the sense that a lot of coverage moves can easily beat it, and it doesn't really beat a lot of the Pokemon above it. So, very linear Pokemon in that sense. Its DD set has, I would say, it could be potentially good, but I don't think it's that good right now as an offensive Pokemon. Outside of Surprise Factor, it does not have that much use over Pokemon like Rayquaza. And to wrap up the A tier, I think it's a fitting to put the next Arceus form, which is Arceus Normal, which I'll just call Arceus. I think Arceus is a fantastic Pokemon. It's super good in HO, and it has the strongest prio in the game. Has the strongest prio in the tier as far as I'm concerned. Very, very good Pokemon. It can set up on a lot. Nerfed a little bit by Marshadow. I would normally rate it in the A+ tier before this, but this is a post-Marshadow tier list, viability rankings, whatever you want to call it. And Arceus kind of fell off in viability. It has a lot of offensive sets and it can run niche moves to bypass its counters, which is one of the things that I'm very much stressing, and that Pokemon that are on the same tier and above it can actually not very much do. Outside of the S tier Pokemon, Mega Gengar cannot bypass a lot of its checks and counters. Arceus Ground cannot bypass lots of its checks and counters. Primal Kyogre can, but at the same time it has a lot of flaws. Marshadow can, but Arceus Fairy can, and then Ho-Oh can't. Ho-Oh's checks and counters are going to be its checks and counters. Although HP Ice can bypass Mega Mence and Zygarde, a lot of its more common counters can't really be bypassed, and they have to give up moves to run these. Zygarde Complete just straight up can't because it's a defensive mon. Arceus can run Ice Beam and Fire Blast to bypass its common checks and counters, while E-Speed Um, S-Claw and these moves can really threaten what it needs. It's really held back by the fact that it cannot use a Z move of a different type because of the fact that that's how Arceus works. But other than that, I think Arceus is a great mon. It's limited in viability by the fact that it can only really be run in one playstyle, and you're also losing things by running it, because by running offensive Arceus forms has become less and less popular because of the roll compression that defensive ones provide, or like the SR ones provide, which are like the utility Arceus forms. So that's the only drawback. Those are the only two drawbacks about running Arceus. Provides no real defensive utility, so it's mainly an HO mon. And the other one is that there's a drawback to running it as opposed to the utility forms like Arceus Ground, like Arceus Fairy, like Arceus Water, etc., etc. Alright, moving on to A-. The first Pokemon, Rayquaza. Rayquaza, undeniably, in my opinion, the best wall breaker in the tier. Nothing can switch into it reliably outside of Arceus Ground and Water, which hate Toxic, and they still eat a ton from Draco. So, Rayquaza, extremely good. Strong Prio, very, very good coverage moves, access to amazing stab, Draco, Dragon Ascent, Overheat, Surf, Dragon Dance, and Swords Dance, Earthquake, V-Create, Thunder even, Surf and Aqua Surf and Aqua Tail along with Airlock to block Primal Groudon's ability. Make Rayquaza a premier wall breaker. Very little can switch into it, but that's about it. It provides almost next to no defensive utility. However, it's very good as an offensive Pokemon. It doesn't thrive on HO just because of the fact that it gives free switches to Xerneas. It doesn't give free switches, but it can give... It's dangerous because Xerneas could potentially set up on it. And, but it's very good on balance in offensive teams, not HO. But I think Rayquaza has kind of fell off in the metagame due to the fact that Marshadow has been kind of a hindrance to it. I think potential Scarf sets could come out of this. I still could see DD, SD kind of got nerfed a little bit. And but I think Rayquaza is still a fantastic Pokemon at doing what it does, which is breaking walls. And the bulky offensive teams that have been rising lately have also helped Rayquaza, because its preferred playstyle is against bulky offense, where it can hit those Celesteelas with the overheats or whatever. It can lure a lot of things. Z-move sets, obviously the Supersonic Sky Strike, super strong. Okay, moving on. Another offensive Arceus form, Arceus Ghost. Before I thought this was the best Arceus form, it's gotten significantly nerfed because of the the Marshadow release. It has two very good sets, SD and CM. Both sets are very good, do different things, beat different Pokemon. The Z move is very strong. It can bypass a lot of its checks and counters. Only problem is Marshadow. I don't think I need to go into a ton of explanation. I would, however, recommend trying the CM set because it's less so affected by Marshadow, because it doesn't really matter that much, but like it's still very good. It's a very good Pokemon. While it did get nerfed in viability a little bit, I still think it's very good. It beats a lot of the Pokemon above it, except for like Ho-Oh, and a lot of the checks to its defensive, or its physical set are checked by its special set, and the special set checked by its physical set. So the first time it comes in, there's a lot of guessing games. And Arceus Ghost, good defensive utility and the ghost typing as well. Alright, moving on. Okay. Stall Pokemon is going to be ranked here, along with Suicide Leads. So I'm putting these two together just because of... essentially, I'm saying that there are Pokemon that are viable only to stall, and Suicide Leads pretty much essentially viable only to HO. That deserve to be ranked here just because they're the reason why those playstyles are viable, but at the same time, they're not good outside of those playstyles. So it seems appropriate to rank them here because I don't like how viability rankings would rank specific Pokemon on those lists. But essentially, I'm rating the playstyles here. The Pokemon above it that would be run on these playstyles, for example, Arceus Ground is a Pokemon that's very common on stall, but stall Pokemon is referring to Pokemon that would only be good on stall. And those Pokemon, which I'll list off right now, just so that so that you like know what I'm talking about, are Clefable, Tentacruel, Toxapex, and wait, let me just go through. Clefable, Tentacruel, Toxapex, Giratina A, so alternate form, or whatever the fuck that stands for, and those Pokemon essentially. I might be missing something, but yeah, those Pokemon. While I don't think those Pokemon individually are better than some of the Pokemon that might be rated below it, for example, Mega Sableye I think is a better Pokemon individually than all of those, but I think stall Pokemon in general are at this point in the metagame. So I think that Pokemon that make stall viable are an A- viability ranking, as in the playstyle itself revolves around those Pokemon. So it's a little bit confusing, but I'm essentially saying stall Pokemon. Suicide Leads, I'm saying Cloyster, Scolipede, DOS, and Excadrill. Those 4. Stall Pokemon, I'm sticking with Clefable, Tentacruel, Toxapex, and fuck, whatever one I said earlier. I don't even remember. Okay, and a Pokemon that is very viable on stall, but not only on stall. Lugia, super good Pokemon, very very strong. Instantly wins against a lot of HO builds. Can be very threatening against BO and Balance, although less so BO because they have a status absorber almost always. Balance can be threatening, depends on how well you play it. Very linear Pokemon, you pretty much just run Toxic, Roost, Whirlwind, and then either Ice Beam or Substitute, which changes what beats it and what it beats. But it's a very binary Pokemon in that sense. Not much to explain there. Oh, as for why I rank it here, I think it's a little bit nerfed in viability, but it maintains pretty much what it needs to do. The only reason why I don't think Lugia is super good is because toxic immunities are all over the place, and status absorbers are common on Balance nowadays, with Zygarde Complete running around, and then Mega Lucario and these Pokemon. So it really doesn't have the same impact as it did before, but I think it's very good at what it does. And Giratina Origin. Giratina Origin form is next. Giratina is very good because it's a roll compression Pokemon. It does defog. It hits relatively hard. It's a Hex user. It's a status spreader. Checks Pidon. Very good on BO. Very good on Balance. It's the go-to Pokemon that doesn't. The go-to defogger that isn't an Arceus form. And that's what it needs to do. It's also good at spreading status because all of the Pokemon that want to switch into it are threatened by status, but depending on what status it runs, it gets access to all 3 of the viable ones. Super good in that sense. It's a Hex user. As Detail, can check Arceus normal, beats Zygarde Complete, and all a lot of Pokemon above it are threatened by status, with the exception of Zygarde Complete, Primal Kyogre, Rest, Pidon, and Xerneas. Everything else hates status in some way or another. Ho-Oh hates status. All support CS forms hate status. Arceus Ghost hates status. Ray hates Will-O-Wisp, not the other, and to an extent, Paralysis as well. Marshadow hates Will-O-Wisp and Paralysis. Mega Gengar hates Paralysis. And Yveltal hates all status. Ho-Oh hates all status that can be applied to it. Arceus hates all status. Lugia hates all status, etc., etc. So that's why Giratina status is so valuable in Ubers. And Next up is Mega Lucario, which seems rated kind of low. Mega Lucario is a very good Pokemon against balance, against bulky offense because of how strong it is. However, it's recently nerfed in Viability due to Marshadow, which I've been saying a lot recently, actually. But, hear me out. Mega Lucario, strong Cryo, strong stabs, very good at setting up and sweeping. However, it has a lot of checks and counters that are relatively common. Arceus Ground, for example, Primal Groudon, Scarf Eviltal, even defensive Eviltal, Scarf Xerneas, Mega Gengar to an extent, Primal Kyogre to an extent is a check, Marshadow is a check, Arceus Fairy is even a check, Ho-Oh. It doesn't really beat a lot of the Pokemon above it. And that's its main problem. Even the Pokemon in the same tier as it doesn't beat, like Arceus Ghost, Lugia, Giratina Origin. These are all like classic checks to Mega Lucario, actually. So like, Mega Lucario really struggles in the fact that it's good at breaking defensive backbones, but it struggles because it requires other teammates to weaken the other Pokemon, its checks and counters, and it struggles against a lot of the top tier Pokemon, in my opinion. So it doesn't really achieve what it really wants to do as a balance breaker, essentially. But I still think it's very good because of the fact that it's very strong, and access to SD makes it a great wall breaker. It has a good speed tier, has access to Cryo, very threatening Pokemon. And the wait, I feel like I'm missing stuff. I feel like I'm missing Pokemon. I think that's it, actually, for what Pokemon are in this tier. So, what I wanted to say is, okay, there are a couple Pokemon that might be on your minds. But trust me, these are the Pokemon that I'm going to be selecting. I know the Suicide Lead / Stall Pokemon thing is a little bit weird as to how I'm rating them, but I'm essentially saying that the reason why they're in this, I'm not going to rate them lower because they don't make sense in an individual viability, because they're not viable on playstyles outside of certain, like, these Pokemon. Like, yes, you can still run like E-Killer, and also E-Killer isn't a Pokemon that is reliant on HO. It's just that it's a Pokemon that fits only on HO. Like, I know that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but what I'm saying is, like, these Pokemon that are Suicide Leads and Stall Pokemon are very different from the rest of the Pokemon because you're running supposedly suboptimal Pokemon, but they're essentially anti-meta. Suicide Leads are completely different because you can't rate their viability at all, in my opinion, because of the way that they work. In that sense, this is my tier list so far for the S and A tiers. There's a lot of relevant Pokemon in the B+ and B tiers that I have yet to mention. For example, Dialga, Celesteela, lots and lots of Arceus forms. Pokemon like, there's a few Megas that I still have yet to mention, like Mega Metagross. So if you want to know what's coming up, I'm going to be releasing another video. It's going to be the rest of the tier list. Rest of the relevant tier list, I would say. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it helps you in building. And also, I wanted to point out something else. At the beginning of this video, I said that Xerneas forces you to run almost irrelevant or suboptimal Pokemon in slots. If you look through this entire list, you'll notice that every single one loses to +2 Xerneas outside of Primal Groudon, and to an extent Mega Lucario. Think about that for a second. Eviltal loses, Primal Groudon loses after it's been weakened. Mega Gengar loses, Arceus Ground loses, Primal Kyogre loses, Marshadow loses, Arceus Fairy loses, Ho-Oh loses after even a tiny bit of chip damage, Thunder KOs. Zygarde loses, Arceus loses, Ray loses, Arceus Ghost loses. Suicide Leads don't count. Stall Pokemon, there are run specifically to beat Zern, like Toxapex, Wakenberry, Toxapex, and stuff. And Clefable. Lugia doesn't lose, but if rocks are up, it gets KO'd by Thunder, so it's shaky. Giratina loses, and Mega Lucario loses if it's not in range and weakened for BP. So yeah, Xerneas forces you to run suboptimal Pokemon. So, the next edition of this tier list, we'll be going through Pokemon that are good at beating Xerneas, good at niche rolls, because I don't know why I still pronounce it like niche, whatever. Sorry, what the fuck. We'll be going through some other options of Pokemon that you normally don't see around, but can be very good in Ubers. So I hope you'll join me for another episode when I break down the rest of the Ubers tier and why I think they're there. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time for another tier list video.